a limestone shelf in the Judean desert, cracked by centuries of wind, holds a narrow gap barely wide enough for a hand to enter. The stone around it is blackened with mineral deposits. The surface is smooth, where the wind has polished it, rough where water once carved channels that have been dry for 2,000 years. The air that moves through the opening carries no scent of dust. It carries something colder, something sealed. The gap does not echo when struck. The stone absorbs the sound completely. In 1965, the Syrian Orthodox Church officially restricted access to a manuscript catalogued as the Qumran Cave 4 fragments of the Book of Giants. The reason listed in the restriction order was content of anthropological concern, not theological concern, not linguistic dispute, not sectarian disagreement, anthropological concern. The fragments were photographed under controlled lighting and stored in sealed containers at the Palestine Archaeological Museum in East Jerusalem. Translation was deferred. For 4 years, no academic institution was granted permission to publish the full Aramaic text. The restriction was not announced publicly. It appeared only in an internal accession memo that was not declassified until 1991. When a graduate researcher at Hebrew University found it filed in a box of administrative correspondence that had been mislabeled as routine logistical records. In 1971, a survey team from the Department of Antiquities of Jordan, conducting a routine sweep of unnumbered caves along the Wadi Murabba'at, identified a secondary chamber below a known scroll cave. The chamber had been sealed with packed limestone and bitumen, a combination consistent with burial practices from the First Temple period. Inside, the team catalogued 14 storage jars of a type consistent with First Temple period burial repositories. The jars were arranged in 2 rows of 7. 7 of those jars contained skeletal material. The survey report listed the skeletal remains as faunal, unidentifiable. The field notes, which were not included in the published report, contained a more specific observation. The supervising archaeologist noted that the skeletal fragments did not match any known faunal reference collection available to the team. The fragments were described as large, dense, and unlike any animal species recorded in the region. The report was filed. No further excavation was authorized. The skeletal material was transferred to a storage facility in Amman. The current location of the material is listed in the facility's accession ledger as redesignated, transferred to Geological Survey, 1983. No geological survey record of the transfer exists. The Book of Giants describes a subterranean vault in a desert wasteland where the bodies of enormous beings were sealed beneath a barrier that no human hand could reproduce. In the next several minutes, you'll see what the text says, what evidence shows, and why it was hidden. If ancient texts describing beings that should not exist fascinates you, hit subscribe. Every week, we uncover what was removed from Scripture. But here's what makes this stranger. The Book of Giants survives in 3 language traditions: Aramaic fragments from Qumran, Manichaean Middle Persian fragments from Turfan, and a later Sogdian version recovered from Central Asian trade route monasteries. The Aramaic fragments are the oldest. They are catalogued under designations 1Q23, 2Q26, 4Q203, 4Q530, 4Q530, 4Q530. The most substantial narrative content survives in 4Q530 and 4Q531. In 1976, Dr. Joseph T. Millick, working at the École biblique et archéologique française in Jerusalem, published the first formal transcription in the Books of Enoch, Aramaic fragments of Qumran Cave 4. Millick's transcription was based on infrared photographs taken between 1952 and 1954. His edition included passages that had been visible in the raw photographs since 1952. but had not appeared in any prior publication. The passages describe a location referred to in the text as the place of sealing, a term that appears in no other Qumran text and in no other known Aramaic literary corpus from any period. Dr. Lorenz Stuckenbrook, then at the University of Michigan, produced a revised English translation in 1997 that confirmed the reading. Stuckenbrook's translation was published through the Society of Biblical Literature and is considered the standard scholarly edition. In his critical apparatus, Stuckenbrook noted that the phrase used for the barrier over the vault, Bar Qiyamah, did not correspond to any standard Aramaic construction for a physical door, gate, wall, or sealed entry. It translated more closely to the standing barrier, or the barrier that remains upright. The grammatical form of Qiyamah implies duration, permanence, something that does not degrade and does not open, not a door, not a wall, a barrier that maintains itself. And this is where it gets disturbing. What we're looking at breaks into 4 parts. The first part appears in 4Q530, column 2, lines 3 through 7. The text describes 2 of the giants, named Ohia and Haya, receiving a dream. In the dream, they see a place in the desert marked by a depression in the earth. The depression is described as circular and approximately 40 cubits in diameter. Beneath the depression, their own bodies are laid out in rows. The text uses the Aramaic word rabrab to describe the bodies, a term used elsewhere in the scrolls to denote exceptional size, specifically size that exceeds the normal range of human variation. The passage states that the bodies were not buried by human hands. It says, "The earth opened and received them, and that after the earth closed, a structure formed over the site without being built." The word used is atkin, which in other Qumran texts refers to something that is decreed or ordained, not constructed, not assembled, not placed. The distinction is precise. The structure was not made. It came into being. The second part appears in 4Q531, fragment 14, lines 2 through 5. This passage describes the barrier itself. The text says the barrier was not stone, it was not wood, it was not metal, it was not any material the dreamers could identify. It is described as something that holds without being held. The passage states that when the giants approached the sealed site in the dream, they could not pass through the barrier, and they could not break it, and they could not dig beneath it. The text specifies that the barrier extended below the ground to a depth equal to the height of the bodies beneath it. This is a specific dimensional claim. The barrier was not a surface feature. It was a vertical structure extending downward, matching the scale of what it enclosed. The giants in the dream tested the barrier from every direction. They could not find an edge. They could not find a top. They could not find a bottom. The barrier had no seam and no join. It was continuous. The third part appears in 4Q532, fragment 1, lines 8 through 11. Here the text describes what the barrier was protecting. The passage states that the bodies of the giants were preserved, not decayed, not skeletal, not reduced, preserved. The Aramaic verb used is shkach, which in this grammatical form means to remain as placed. The bodies were in the same condition as when they were sealed. The text also states that the barrier served a dual function. It prevented entry from above, and it prevented exit from below. The language implies that whatever was sealed in the vault was expected to remain active, not dead, not inert, not at rest, sealed. The distinction between sealed and buried is maintained consistently across all 4 fragments. The text never uses the standard Aramaic burial vocabulary. It never uses the word for tomb. It never uses the word for grave. It uses the word for sealing, the same vocabulary used elsewhere in the scrolls to describe the sealing of prophetic scrolls that are meant to be opened at a future time. The implication is unambiguous. The vault was not a burial. It was a containment. The fourth part appears in 6Q8, a fragment so damaged that only partial lines survive. Line 4 contains the phrase, "The place of sealing shall not be found until the days of waking." Line 5 contains a partial reference to "those who search" and a verb form that Stuckenbrook translated as "shall be turned away." Line 6, which is almost entirely lost, contains the remnants of what appears to be a numerical reference, possibly a count of the sealed bodies, possibly a distance measurement. The reconstruction is uncertain. What is certain is the implication of the surviving lines. The vault was designed to remain hidden, and the barrier itself would prevent discovery, not by being concealed, not by being guarded, by being impenetrable. The barrier was the concealment. In 2014, a geophysical survey conducted by the Earth Sciences Institute at the University of Tripoli, in coordination with the Libyan Department of Archaeology, used ground-penetrating radar across a section of the Hamada al-Hamra Plateau in western Libya. The survey was aimed at identifying subterranean water channels for a regional infrastructure planning project. The team operated a sensors and software Pulse EKKO Pro system with 100 MHz and 200 MHz antennas, calibrated for desert sediment conditions. At coordinate 29.7 degrees north, 10.4 degrees east, the radar returned an anomaly, a vertical signal block extending approximately 14 meters below the surface. The block was uniform. It returned a consistent reflection profile across all passes. It did not match any known geological formation in the region. The survey report, published in the Journal of North African Geophysics, Volume 12, Issue 3, 2015, described the anomaly as a subsurface structure of unknown composition exhibiting properties inconsistent with natural deposition. Dr. Farid El-Mansouri, the lead geophysicist on the survey, noted in his field commentary that the radar signal appeared to reflect off the structure as though it were encountering a solid metallic surface, but that no metal deposits existed in the formation and no industrial activity had ever been recorded at the site. The reflection pattern showed no diffraction, no scattering, no edge effects. The signal returned clean and uniform, as though the surface below was perfectly flat and perfectly smooth. The anomaly was never investigated further. The coordinate was not published in the final public version of the report. It appeared only in the technical supplement, which had a print run of 40 copies distributed to institutional subscribers. Here's what the translators left out. In 4Q530, column 2, line 6, the standard published translation reads, "And the earth closed over them." This is the reading that appears in Stuckenbrook's 1997 translation, and in every derivative publication since. But the raw photograph of the fragment, archived at the Ancient Biblical Manuscript Center in Claremont, California, shows additional characters at the end of line 6 that were not included in the transcription. The characters are partially obscured by a fiber separation in the parchment, but enough of the letter forms are visible to reconstruct the reading. The characters, when reconstructed by Dr. Michael Wise in an unpublished 2004 working paper circulated among specialists at the University of Chicago, form the Aramaic phrase Vela Yekulin Leateha, which translates as, "and it cannot be opened by any hand." This phrase was omitted from the formal edition. No explanation for the omission appears in the critical apparatus. No footnote, no bracketed text, no indication that additional characters were present on the fragment. The phrase changes the meaning of the passage. The earth did not simply close. It sealed in a way that was permanent and irreversible. The barrier was not a physical obstruction that could be removed with tools or effort. It was described as something that could not be opened by any human effort whatsoever. The omission of this phrase from every published translation means that every reader of the Book of Giants for the last 27 years has encountered a text that is incomplete, and the part that is missing is the part that matters most. The suppression starts at the Council of Laodicea in 363 CE. The Council of Laodicea issued Canon 60, which established the official list of accepted canonical texts for the Christian Church. The Book of Giants was not included. More significantly, Canon 60 was the first formal ecclesiastical directive that categorized texts describing the physical remains of pre-flood beings as non-canonical, not merely excluded, but categorized as material that should not be copied, should not be read aloud, and should not be preserved. The language of the canon was specific. It did not describe these texts as erroneous. It described them as productive of disorder among the faithful. The concern was not doctrine. The concern was the effect the content had on people who encountered it. In the decades that followed, Bishop Athanasius of Alexandria, in his 367 Easter letter, reinforced this position by name, listing texts that described the bodies of the ancient mighty ones as among the writings that breed disturbance and false inquiry. Athanasius directed that copies held in monastic libraries be identified and surrendered. The directive was enforced through scriptoria. Monasteries that held copies were instructed to overwrite the parchment. The practice of palimpsest, scraping the ink from parchment and reusing the surface for accepted texts, was applied systematically to manuscripts in this category. In several confirmed cases, fragments of the Book of Giants were recovered from beneath overwritten text, the original ink still faintly visible in ultraviolet light. The suppression continued through the medieval period. In 787, the Second Council of Nicaea, while primarily focused on the iconoclasm controversy, renewed the Laodicean catalogue and expanded the restriction to include any derivative texts that reference the physical characteristics of antediluvian beings. In 1054, the Great Schism between the Eastern and Western churches split the enforcement mechanism, but both traditions maintained the prohibition independently. In the Latin West, the Decretum Gratiani, compiled around 1140 by the monk Gratian in Bologna, restated the exclusion and added a civil penalty. Possession of prohibited texts concerning the giants of old was subject to confiscation and, in repeated cases, burning. When the Qumran fragments were discovered in 1952, the initial editorial team, operating under the auspices of the Jordanian Department of Antiquities and the École Biblique, followed a publication schedule that prioritized canonical and near-canonical texts. The Book of Giants fragments were placed in the lowest priority tier. They were not transcribed until 1976, 24 years after discovery. By comparison, the Book of Isaiah scroll was transcribed and published within 7 years. Now, here's where it gets active. In 2018, Dr. Sarah Hennigan, a researcher affiliated with the Institute of Archaeology at University College London, submitted a research permit application to the Libyan Department of Antiquity to conduct a targeted excavation at the coordinate identified in the 2014 Hamada al-Hemra radar survey. The application proposed a small-scale probe, a 2-meter test trench, to verify the composition of the subsurface anomaly. The application included the full radar dataset, a geological assessment from the University of Tripoli, and a letter of institutional support from University College London. The application was reviewed for 11 months. In December 2019, the permit was denied. The denial letter, reviewed by this investigation, cited incomplete geological documentation and insufficient institutional sponsorship as the reasons. Both reasons were contradicted by the contents of the application file. Dr. Hennigan revised the application with additional geological data and a second institutional letter of support from the University of Tripoli and resubmitted in March 2020. The second application was not responded to. No acknowledgement was issued, no tracking number was assigned. In October 2021, Dr. Hennigan's contact at the Libyan Department of Antiquity informed her informally that the coordinate in question had been reclassified as a restricted mineral zone and that no archaeological permits would be issued for the site. No mineral survey had been conducted at the location. No mineral deposits had been identified. No mining company had filed a claim. The reclassification appeared to exist solely to prevent archaeological access. In a separate incident, in 2022, a researcher at the Ancient Biblical Manuscript Center in Claremont requested access to the original photographic plates of 4Q530, column 2, to verify the omitted characters at the end of line 6 that Dr. Wise had identified. The request was processed and approved. The researcher traveled to the center. When the researcher arrived to examine the plates, the specific frame containing line 6 of column 2 was not in the archive. The frame number was listed in the catalog. The catalog indicated it had been checked out for conservation review in 2019 and had not been returned. The conservation review was attributed to a department that had been disbanded in 2017. No staff member associated with the department could be contacted. The frame remains unlocated. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying there is a vault in the Libyan desert containing the preserved bodies of ancient giants behind a barrier that defies the known laws of physics. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying the Book of Giants is an eyewitness account of a structure built by non-human intelligence. I'm not saying that. But what the text describes, when you look at it carefully, matches a physical structure that has been detected by modern ground-penetrating radar, a vertical anomaly, uniform, extending 14 meters below the surface, composed of an unknown material, reflecting radar as though metallic in a region with no metal deposits, located in a desert, at a coordinate that has been sealed from archaeological access through an administrative reclassification that cites no evidence and serves no documented purpose. What we have to confront is the simplest explanation that fits the evidence. If the Book of Giants describes a sealed subterranean vault containing preserved bodies of enormous beings, and if the text specifies that the barrier over the vault is not made of any known material and cannot be opened by human effort, and if modern ground-penetrating radar has detected a subsurface structure of unknown composition at a desert location consistent with the text's geographic references, and if access to that location has been systematically blocked through administrative reclassification, denied permits, and unacknowledged applications, then the most economical explanation is not that the text is allegory. The most economical explanation is not that the text is metaphor. The most economical explanation is that the text is documentation, a record of something that was found, described, and sealed, written by people who saw it, preserved by people who feared it, suppressed by institutions that understood what it described. And the seal is still in place. The limestone shelf in the Judean desert still holds that narrow gap. The wind still moves through it. The air still carries something colder than the stone around it. The mineral deposits still blacken the entrance. The surface is still smooth where the wind polished it. The stone still absorbs the sound of any knock. It is still there, still sealed, exactly the way the text said it would be.